And we are live. A very warm welcome to another special edition of the Smart Money podcast. So if you joined us last week, it was obviously focused on the Super League and that developing story. And a week later, things have developed a lot further. So I'm your host, David Claxton. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my guest once again, the Celtic State of Mind contributor and Football Insomniac podcast host, Colin Watt. Colin, are you coming up for air for what happened last week?
I was saying on another show, I feel as if some celebrity marriages lasted longer than this European Super League, and they were pretty quick as well. But no, I mean, if you'd have told us this was what was going to happen when we came on air this time last week, then I probably would have believed you, to be honest, but I'd have still been as shocked as what I am right now.
Definitely. I think the phrase a week is a long time in politics. Maybe in football, it's a bit more intense.
It's twice as long.
Yeah, I think so. So if you're joining us tonight, we're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Definitely give a subscription to A State of Mind's YouTube channel. We're currently at about 11,000 subscribers. There's more shows being added week on week, and I'm sure you'll find something you like. So it's hard to know where to jump in after last week's discussion. It really has developed a hell of a lot. But we're going to look at the overall reaction to everything. We're going to look at the consequences of this project and then what happens next. And overall, in a week that rocked the game and its foundations to its core, we ask, is this the opening salvo in an ongoing power struggle between the haves and have-nots of European football? Or has the Super League finally been put to bed for the foreseeable future? So, Colin, since we last spoke, when we came off air, the Super League was very much a viable project. And in an hour or two, all the English clubs chucked the towel in. Ed Woodward from Man United resigned. Were you shocked at how quickly it all unfolded?
I was. I mean, as we said last week when we were speaking about this on air, it was always one of those things where, oh, the European Super League, it's bound to happen, it's bound to happen, it's bound to happen, to the point of where the statement was getting prepared to come out and one of the journalists in the UK leaked it, and we're still going, nah, it's definitely not going to happen. And then that statement came out that we were speaking about last week, and we're going, all right, this actually might turn into reality. Little did we know that actually we should have just believed our gut in the first instinct to say that it was never going to happen. But yeah, I mean, we came off air last week. Liverpool were playing Leeds, and Leeds had the T-shirts that were saying you had to earn it, you had to earn it. And then the next day, Chelsea playing, was it Brighton, I believe? And the game's postponed 15 minutes because of the crowds outside Stamford Bridge. And as we spoke about last week, the legacy fans, they were showing their value to not only their club, but to the game of football as a whole. And in the end, in the terms of the European Super League, the fans won out. In terms of this continue to be an ongoing cause for concern, I think there's still a long way to go.
I'd agree with you, and we'll delve into the various parts of this. But one thing that I found very interesting was within the 24-hour span of this league actually formally being announced, every English club basically chucked in the towel, and then the other clubs kind of followed from that. Do you think it was purely down to fan pressure? They really didn't expect, the Chelsea protests seemed to gain a lot of traction. The decision for Chelsea was nearly made after that, according to some reports. Do you think the English kind of fans played such a central role to that? Because the other clubs were quite slow then to kind of get in line with these clubs not supporting this league.
I think what we had is we had two clubs in Chelsea and Man City who weren't completely sold on this European Super League and who had openly admitted that they came along for the ride because they feared being left behind. Now, when there's that amount of pressure, not just coming from the fans, coming from politicians, coming from Sky Sports, coming from all the media outlets, if you're not sure on something, it's enough to change your mind very quickly and go, do you know what? We're probably better out of this than what we are to seeing how it goes down the road. If we get left behind, we get left behind. And I think that's where Chelsea started. Ironically, Man City were the next team after that. Those were the two that were kind of verging on the edge. And then one by one, surely after that, the teams followed. I think the reaction of the fan base and the media in England was bigger than what it was in Italy and in Spain, and that's why you see there's still teams like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus that are still saying that they're involved in being part of this. Whereas in England, it's like, oh, that's yesterday's news, let's move on. Let's forget this ever happened, because it was a terrible PR stunt for these teams. And it's like, oh, well, if we don't talk about it, it never happened.
One of the interesting things you raised there about Man City and Chelsea, the two teams backed by two of the richest people in the world, don't really have the same commercial issues that, say, Liverpool have.
No.
Man United as well. Do you think that was maybe they had the luxury of not being kind of chained to this league for the revenue, because really they have an open checkbook anyway, both clubs, and that maybe made the decision a bit easier, where the other clubs, American owners, thought that, this was a new revenue stream we could open up. Do you think there was a different mindset then between the two clubs, or those set of clubs?
I think you've got a set of owners, especially these six, who are determined to make as much money as possible. And for a lot of them, they saw this European Super League as a way to make even more money for their club. Now, a lot of these clubs, now you look at Chelsea, they are now privately owned by Roman Abramovich. You've got City, who I believe have come off the stock exchange. Manchester United aren't. They are still a publicly traded company. You saw what happened to their share price as soon as the European Super League was announced. It kind of skyrocketed. Liverpool, pretty much fully privately owned by FSG. I couldn't tell you for sure if they're still on the stock exchange or not. But it was just another way to bring in money. And you mentioned about City and Chelsea having this open checkbook. Financial fair play will still come into it at some point. You take a look at City's wage bill and the money that they're spending every year. If it wasn't for the sponsorship deals from basically their owners in Etihad, then they wouldn't be able to put this product on the park. So if they saw it as an additional way to bring that revenue in, maybe there's less of a reliance on these sponsors to provide that money coming into them and make the club perhaps more self-sustainable for them to then maybe move it on a couple of years down the line.
Yeah, and I think one of the really interesting things I found from that, what you said about the commercial partners, say, that City have, just say you're a sponsor of the Premier League and you see what has happened. Does that devalue your sponsorship then, what these clubs have done? And does it maybe tarnish their brand? And we'll get into this in far more detail, but does it tarnish their brand? We discussed last week, you have the official paint sponsor of Tottenham Hotspur. You have the official wine sponsor of Man United. Do you think it'll make some of these brands a lot less likely to pull the trigger on a potential sponsorship because they don't feel they can trust these teams, these rebel teams?
Well, I thought it was quite interesting to see, I believe it was Liverpool had a sponsor that pulled out because of their involvement within the European Super League. So there is a bit to say that perhaps these brands are like, I don't want involved in this, I'm going to move away. And the clubs acted probably just in enough time to avoid more of these sponsors pulling out. Now, I mean, if this league was to go ahead, you'd have the initial teams that would lose some sponsors here and there because they don't want involved in it. But then once the money starts taking over, then they'll attract other sponsors. You had the JP Morgans who were going to basically fund the league for like 3 seasons, I believe it was, with the investment that they were going to put into it. It would just have been a case of, well, that sponsor's gone, we'll replace it with another, and someone will want involved in it. But then when it looked as though the teams were coming out and coming back into the English Premier League, then out came the apologies, out came we didn't really know what was going to happen, we're really sorry. And I think they're still trying their best to save their face right now.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. The consequences for this could go on for even a couple of years for what is coming out. And one of the really, and I mean, this is really interesting to me, it was a story in the Financial Times about the background to this Super League. And UEFA president, Alexander Chefrin, went on record and said on the Saturday, so last Saturday, he was frantically ringing Andrea Agnelli, the president of Juventus, because all these rumors started coming out about the proposed Super League. And he spoke, according allegedly to Chefrin, he spoke to Agnelli on the phone, and Agnelli confirmed that they were only rumors and said that he would ring him back in an hour. And Chefrin then alleges that Agnelli turned off his phone and the announcement was made the next day. So what's really interesting about this is Chefrin, quote, said about Agnelli, "I have never seen a person lie so many times. Now, where this gets into Shakespearean plot or Game of Thrones, whatever type of drama you like, Chefron is godfather to the daughter of Agnelli. This is crazy stuff. Like, does this just show that money trumps everything with some of these clubs?
This is basically the setting for Godfather 4. This is going to come out on Netflix next year, and that's another money spinner for these clubs. No, I mean, we've all known there's, okay, I'll say this, there's corruption in football. We all know there's corruption in football. But when you see how things are laid out, like especially how you said it, it doesn't take Ted Hastings to work out where there's corruption going on in the game. And the fact that one stabbed another in the back, it won't have been the first time and it won't be the last time. And yet the thing is, they always say it's better to keep your enemies closer than your friends. So maybe that's just the way it is with Cherifin and the Juventus chairman.
Yeah, and we're going to dig into who some of the winners and losers are in a few minutes. But right, so we go to this. By all accounts, all these clubs pulling out now. This has to be dead. Like, it has to be. You've got three left, as you said. You've got Real Madrid, you've got Barcelona, and you've got Juventus. And Florentino Perez, the president of Real Madrid, has said that the ESL is on, quote, standby, and that binding contracts mean that clubs, quote, cannot leave. Is this just him making things up, or do you think these binding contracts these clubs can get out of? What do you think? Why are these clubs holding on? What's the benefit like?
It's desperation, I think, from Florentino Perez. I think you look at the three teams that's left are the three teams that are probably in the most financial trouble across Europe. You look at Barcelona, who have over £300 million of debt. Real Madrid currently restructuring their stadium. Juventus, who have forked out an absolute fortune for Cristiano Ronaldo's contract and really aren't reaping the benefits of it because they're not getting to the latter stages of the Champions League to get that money back. The money that is in Italian football is not quite up to the standard of what you get from the English, the Spanish, or even the German game. So they're looking for additional revenue sources. Perez is an interesting character. I can't quite work him out. It's like one of those times where someone says to you, all right, we're just not doing these plans. These plans aren't happening. And then he'll come back 5 hours later and say, right, so we're doing these then. And you go, well, have you not been listening for the last couple of hours? It's just it's not happening. But he's got this determination because I think he's made that much. He's dove 2 feet in. He has no way of getting out of this to try and save his face. He has to just keep going and keep going and keep going. It's very much like the Trump tactics that won him the election. He would say something and everyone knew it was completely outlandish, but he just kept saying it and saying it and saying it, as if to say, the more I say it, the more you'll believe I'm actually talking sense. And that is very similar to the way that Perez is approaching this right now.
It's nearly like an alternate reality where, some people believe it, some people don't. It's just too, no matter what is said, this guy will go against it. And sorry, go on.
And his supporters, the supporters of Perez, a bit like the supporters of Trump, will believe it and back it all the way. And it doesn't matter what sort of facts and whatever else you put in front of them. It's like, no, this is my beliefs and this is what's happening and you can't tell me otherwise. And
one thing about him as a character, which I saw someone on Twitter, I can't give a credit because I can't remember who it was, but one guy on Twitter said, Perez said the main reason for this was it was for the good of the game, but it was also to help clubs come back from COVID and kind of keep these clubs financially solvent. No one forced Florentino Perez to pay Gareth Bale what they have paid Gareth Bale, who is now out on loan at Tottenham. The fee that was paid for him, the fee that have been paid for all these players that he has been president during his tenure at Real Madrid. No one forced them to spend that money. Where other clubs, again, you look at even a smaller club like Norwich, they are run fiscally responsible. They have a certain identity. That's not really fair, is it, to kind of say we need this Super League because we basically haven't looked after our club in a financially responsible way? That's a farcical argument, isn't it?
What other argument do they have, though? I mean, they've got to try and win people over some way. Now, apparently there was an audience that were interested in this European Super League. Now, I've not met many of them, but according to Perez, there's plenty of people out there, including people that fall into my age bracket, apparently, that were absolutely delighted about this European Super League. But that's not what the game's all about. Surely it's not what the game's all about. Look, if you're in financial distress, you have to restructure your club to make it self-sustainable. You see what happens to clubs that don't manage to balance their books. They end up going out of business and they have to come back again. Now, everyone will say, well, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus, they're too big a club to fail. They're far too big a club to fail. But what about in the early 2000s when you had Deportivo La Coruña, a team that were flying high in La Liga? I believe they won the title as well in 99-2000.
Yeah, they did. Yep, they did.
And then now, where are they? I believe they're in, if it's not the second division, it's the third division of Italian football. You take a look at teams, the famous Italian team, totally, is it Parma, where they had Hernan Crespo coming through, you had Gianluigi Buffon, all these players, not even in Serie A. So these teams that were too big to fail can fail. And it's almost as if they're now at the stage where, well, if this isn't happening, we don't know what our next step is, so we'll just keep ploughing on with this idea and hope that some money will appear at some point.
And isn't that the central problem in this whole Super League brainwave, that these clubs felt like they were entitled to call themselves the biggest clubs in the world? And as we discussed on the previous podcast, it's sporting merit. So Spurs, who again lost another cup final this past weekend, they haven't won anything for nearly a decade or over a decade.
2009, I think it was.
Yeah, a couple of good seasons, obviously in terms of Premier League performance, and obviously getting to the final of the Champions League. But that was the central issue that really caused this pushback, wasn't it? The merit question of, we're not saying the Champions League, and we'll delve into that later on, but we're not saying the current model is perfect. But at the very least, there is a veneer of clubs having to earn it. That was the central problem that everyone in the game had, and European football fans had as well, wasn't it?
I think so, but if I put a sort of devil's advocate twist on this, say, for example, there was a 20-team league as what was proposed in this, and it had a relegation and a promotion aspect to it, do you think it would have still got the same reception across Europe as what it was kind of alleged to be, like a breakaway Super League? It was like the elite of the elite, they called themselves, and it was a closed door system. I would say there's a lot of leagues across Europe that claim to be this open door because they've got the promotion up and down, but then it's only maybe one or two that goes up from a 20-team league. Or you've got the Champions League where you finish fourth and you can still qualify for the group stages. That is arguably as closed door as what they were proposing here. So would the promotion and the relegation aspect have changed anything?
I would agree with you. I think it would have done, and it would have made their job a lot easier in selling it. And they, once there wasn't that guarantee, that franchise type, Americanization of sport, I think it would have made their job a lot easier in selling it. I think football fans overall, it was just this divine right that we are the big clubs and we eat year in, year out, we can get access to these revenues. And the other central problem was the amount of money being offered by JP Morgan to kind of kickstart this league, and then the guaranteed revenues season on season. It would have, as we discussed, created a transfer budget of a Premier League team of about 70 to 80 million versus potentially in the first season, nearly 600 million, which is absolutely farcical. They would hoover up the best players. It would not be competitive in any way, shape or form.
You mentioned there about the sort of franchise aspect to it. Now, when it came out that the leagues were saying basically, we're not going to have you in. So the English League were wanting to kick out Chelsea, Arsenal, etc. And the Spanish League had almost voted to kick out Real Madrid, Barcelona and Atletico. I started to think to myself, could this turn into the NFL of football, where you're perhaps only playing something like 16 to 20 games a season, but because of the money that's been ploughed into it, it's enough to make it sustainable? You take a look at the NFL, it's a 16-game regular season, and then if you qualify, you've got, 4 rounds of playoffs? So you're playing a total of perhaps only 20 games a season. That is exactly what could have happened with a Super League. So could it have been sustainable on its own, moving away from the likes of the English, the Spanish and the Italian leagues? If the money was there, then I would have said yes.
I think that's a terrifying prospect from a domestic league standpoint. It devalues how can a local fan base be engaged with that. And say you're from a team that isn't in that franchise situation, it just devalues the entire sport. And talking about the NFL, that's an interesting one you bring up. That's a 16-game season, but this season is the first season they're going to expand to 17 games. And there was a lot of uproar between the players and the owners around that decision, because obviously that game, very high impact on your body, all that type of thing. But the central thing as well about this Super League, one of the points you mentioned there, and to build on that, is that basically you would have, in effect, a salary cap, which is similar to the NFL. And this was one of the potential proposals of the Super League, to make it a bit fair, where you could only have a certain amount. I think it was about 50% of your turnover allocated to wages and all the various costs for players. Would that be one good thing? And I know we have financial fair play. We don't have to kind of get into that, because there's been a lot of issues with that, Man City and everything. But would that have been one positive, where it was real enforceable salary cap, like you have in the NBA, like you have in the NFL? It's not a free for all. Clubs have to, have a limit on how much money they can spend on their squads. Would that have actually been a good benefit of this proposed league?
I don't think so, because you're still talking about, say, perhaps 50% of your revenue. A team like Man City getting £300 million off JP Morgan as a sponsor. You're talking maybe another 100 million off TV rights. That's still the best part of 300, maybe 400 million in a wage budget for the season. That still means these guys are going to get paid the exit like 10, 15 million pounds a season just to get them in. They'll probably have smaller squads because of that as well. And then it doesn't help the transfer market. You see the value of players that continue to skyrocket because of the high wages and the high fees that everyone's willing to pay. And it's the rest of the teams across Europe that are being left behind. You saw it when Mesut Ozil made the move over to Fenerbahce in January. Fenerbahce actually had to set up a texting system where fans could text in a donation of like £1.50, and it was like a message to Mesut. And within the week, it paid for only 3 or 4 weeks of his salary. But it was like, you're talking something in the region of £1.5 to £2 million. It was utterly crazy. The wage structure for teams like Fenerbahce, with the money that they're getting in, they're bending that to bring in a player of Mesut Ozil. Now, where would he have ended up anywhere else in Europe? He would have probably had to take a wage cut. But when you take the wage cut from the wages that he was earning at Arsenal, he's out of the reach for everyone else. So this money's already ruining football. And that's without the wage cap, and that's without the extra money being brought into the game. So I don't think it would have made any difference at all.
It's what you're saying there, and we are going to delve into kind of what the future looks like. I think there has to be a realignment of finances in football after this debacle. There has to be the haves and the have-nots. It's a chasm at this moment in time. It cannot be allowed to continue. And we'll jump into that a bit later on. But in terms of something actually Perez said about JP Morgan, JP Morgan came out and actually apologized for their involvement in this project.
That was nice of them.
Yeah, it was. And Perez has said that they haven't abandoned the Super League, which again, to the tune of 2.8 billion, that was the startup cost. So again, it's this alternate reality where we're hearing, where it's quite obvious that this project as it currently is dead. No English football club will probably touch it with a barge pole. But in Spain and Italy, it seems to be a bit different. It hasn't been as negative, even from some of the media reports about it. Why do you think it was so different in England? Just overall, the media, the whole fan base, everything. It was so against the proposal. Why do you think that was?
I think as much as English football tries to deny it, it is starting to come away from the regular fans. But it's the regular fans that still have the biggest attachment to the clubs. Now, you saw what happened outside Stamford Bridge before the Chelsea game. Now, the game got delayed. The English Premier League are saying it's nothing at all to do with that. But if you saw the crowds that were outside, it was absolutely everything to do with that. And you've still got your regular season ticket holders of 20, 30, 40 years who go week in, week out. Whereas you go to Barcelona, and I've been lucky enough to go there, and I've been 4 or 5 rows behind the goal, and I turn around and everyone that's there is a tourist. You've got Chinese and Japanese tourists that's there. and they've got the scarf, and they're looking to take the pictures for Instagram to say that they were there at the Champions League, or they were there at La Liga. They saw Messi, they saw Suarez, they saw all these players, but you've not got your regular week in, week outs. And that is probably one of the reasons why English football was more against these proposals, because there is more of a regular fan base. It's not as much of a tourist game as what it can be at Real Madrid and Barcelona.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think English fans overall, the attendance figures have been extremely stable for the English game across nearly all levels of it. Where in Spain, in other countries, Italy most notably, Juventus were one of the first big teams to have to actually downgrade their stadium in terms of attendance number of people who could attend, which shows you there just seems to be a divergence with the English game. English fans, or even UK fans, love live football. They love going to the game. There seems to be that kind of inbuilt loyalty, where with the other teams, they either have too big a stadium or the fan base just isn't enough to kind of sustain it locally, which is interesting. So if we're kind of then if we're kind of moving on to the consequences of this project, should these rebel clubs actually be penalised? Should they have the book thrown at them? So we're looking at potential kind of penalties of kicked out of Europe, a transfer ban, financial penalties. What do you think? What's realistic? You know, you don't want to go too heavy, but you kind of have to make a stand here. You really do.
There's what fans would think should happen, and then there's what will happen. And I can guarantee that the thoughts of the fans and what they want to see happen won't get anywhere near that. I mean, there was calls for the teams to be relegated from the English Premier League. There was calls for them to be banned from Europe. There was calls for them to be fined the amount of money that they would have actually got for joining the European Super League. It will be nowhere near that. Nowhere near it at all. There will be no ban from Europe. UEFA were desperate to get these teams back, to the point where there was discussions that UEFA had actually offered more money to the English teams to get them to come back to join UEFA, because they were saw as the major building block of this league with the 6 teams. I don't know what will happen. I don't think there's an appetite from the FA, from the Premier League and from UEFA to punish these teams seriously. I think it will be a suspended fine and probably a suspended points deduction. I think that's as severe as it could probably go. And it's nowhere near good enough for what actually could have destroyed football.
And I think what you said there's nearly two classes of teams involved. You have some of the teams within 24 hours, the English teams who pulled out, and then you have some of the teams. And again, Chefrin has called Juventus, Barcelona, and Real Madrid flat earthers who think the Super League still exists. So I think you might have a kind of separation between the clubs who came to their senses, whatever you want to think about that, and then the clubs who are kind of hanging on to this, and they might face the most severe penalties. But for me, the most farcical thing is some of these teams are still in the Champions League, the competition they wanted to get rid of, and if you can't push back against them, or at least show some reasonable penalties that make them think about doing this ever again, we've really learned nothing. UEFA's hand is as powerful as it's ever going to be to hit back on these teams. Mm-hmm. But one thing where it might not be UEFA who's the power broker here to stop this happening again. So a story came out today from Associated Press that Italian teams are going to write into their rules for Serie A that other teams cannot break away from their domestic league and impact upon it. And it might even be written into the Premier League. Do you think that's one way where you take the pressure off UEFA? They don't want to hammer these teams to cause even more problems. Does the domestic game have even a bigger part to play in really tying these teams to their domestic leagues? Do you think that's a realistic way?
I think there was a lot of lawyers that were scrolling through the rule books of their own associations to realise that this rule wasn't actually already written into it, and they're now frantically trying to get it in. It would make sense. But then does it also then create the sort of closed league that we were speaking about? Now, I know there's no There's no suggestion that these teams would never get relegated, etc., from the top league. But what if the league was to collapse? What if there was to be a merger, like there is in discussions with the Dutch and the Belgian league? Does that then mean that you have to rewrite the rules again? They'll have to be careful with how they actually word this. But yeah, I'm really surprised there wasn't that rule in the first place that says if you want to leave the league, here is your fine, here is your payment that you have to pay to get out. A lot of these lawyers will be like, who actually wrote these rules? Where did this all come from? Because this wasn't the first time that the European Super League was ever discussed.
Yeah, and as we discussed last week, I mean, UEFA had enough warnings about this, and even domestic teams. So if we look at some of the potential winners and losers, so we've got Nasser Al Khalifi, PSG president, and he is now taken over from Andrea Agnelli as the European Club Association chairman. Obviously, Agnelli chucked it in once the Super League was kind of launched. It's quite ironic that a man who has bankrolled the team and bought Neymar and financial fair play out the window is now the head of this organization, isn't it?
I mean, what does it suggest that the future holds for the European Club Association? Suddenly financial fair play goes out the window, then there'll be new rules brought in. Look, if we're going to discuss these new Champions League reforms, but they're every bit as bad as what the European Super League has been, and it just seems as though they've been brushed under the carpet. Just wait till it actually comes out in the open, and once one of the new rules comes into play, then everyone will be back up in arms again.
Definitely, and I think if we look at some of the other winners from this, you can talk about UEFA. We'll see what happens there. German and French teams overall, Khalifi and PSG, and obviously Bayern Munich and Dortmund, come out very, very well from this whole situation. And we'll delve into kind of the German rule 50+1 and later on. But these teams, again, why do you think there was such a difference between those and even the English teams? Because we discussed, English fans, there's great attendance levels. They're kind of are woven into the fabric of those clubs, despite it being kind of, the Premier League being the premier domestic league in the world. Why did German, particularly German teams, take that move to not support the Super League? Why do you think that was?
I think what you see, especially in Germany, is the power of the fan. Now, you try and get a ticket to go to a Borussia Dortmund or a Bayern Munich. It's very, very difficult because they do have a loyal fan base that go week in, week out. Everything's set up for fan enjoyment. When you go to these games, obviously, the Germans were the first to bring in the safe standing aspect of football. You've got the sort of, it's like they encourage the fan engagement, and you've got the 50+1 rule. There's so many supporters clubs. There's so many community outreach programs for supporters where you can basically make your life around being a Bayern Munich fan, being a Borussia Dortmund fan. Everything you do can be linked back to your club, and it makes you feel part of the club. And having that fan ownership, or the 50+1 aspect to it, it builds that connection. And I'm not surprised that the English teams are starting to look into this, especially coming out of the English government. Look, the German teams didn't need this. If you look at it and you go through the money that they've lost over this period whilst we've been stuck at home during the pandemic, the German teams will make that back because of the loyalty that they've built up with the fan base. They didn't need to go into this European Super League. They didn't need the pressure. They didn't need the hassle that came with it. So I don't think it was even a difficult decision for Borussia Dortmund or Bayern Munich to do that. I was surprised at PSG, but then there is a connection between PSG and with Kerefin, who's the head of UEFA as well. So maybe it isn't so much of a surprise.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to a fundamental thing of how those German clubs are run. It's a different perspective on football. They financially probably better run overall than the kind of other teams involved in this Super League. So we look at the founding clubs. The fallout, Ed Woodward finally gone from Man United. The fans obviously
not yet.
Well, end the season.
He's going.
End the season, but he's on his way. Let's just put the bus. Boyce's bus is picking him up, and he's going soon. You had apologies from John W. Henry from Liverpool, Joel Glazer.
That was pathetic from John W. Henry. Let's just go back to that. The idea of it being your club your club. He kept saying your club, as if it's like you're not even a part of this then. Our club. You control the club. You actually finance this. But it was like a case of, oh, it's your club. It was passing the blame off so quickly. It was the worst apology I've ever seen.
And talking about that point, actually, the communications around this is...
The bus drivers just turned up.
Oh, good to see you tuning in. But talk about communications here. So we had UEFA coming out, Cheffer and obviously everyone in the connected to various clubs. The Super League overall, the players involved were extremely quiet, and it was only after the fact. Really, Perez came out when the English teams were kind of out the door, and his kind of incendiary interview in Spain, using a couple of expletives as well during the interview. The communication gap was stunning, to be honest. You had huge pushback, obviously, from UEFA, but it was nearly like the Super League teams didn't really have their ducks in a row to push back against this, didn't have kind of spokespeople in place to say why this was a good thing. Do you think it was just mismanagement because they left it till the last minute to kind of get ahead of this new Champions League reformatting, or was it they just kind of expected things to fall into place?
I definitely think the timing of this was announced to take the shine away from what UEFA were heralding as a new dawn for European football with these new layouts for their European tournaments. And it was almost done as anything you can do, we can do bigger and better. And it completely went back and slapped the European Super League teams in the face. The Champions League reforms have come out. They are a complete shambles, to be perfectly honest. They are really punishing smaller teams and making it more of a closed shop. But because of the hurrah of the European Super League, it's not really been spoke about.
And something about that, Chefferin in particular, when he was pushing back when the Super League was still alive, he mentioned Celtic, and I believe it was Dynamo Zagreb as well, and a couple of other teams, Galatasaray as well, as these kind of, so to use the phrase from the Super League, these legacy clubs, have the heritage, have won European trophies, have the fan base. Is this really going to be the reality? Are these clubs going to get this power back? Is this realistic?
No, it's not. I mean, we take a look at the Champions League reforms. They're talking about playing an extra 100 games a season across this. And the rule to me that is completely bonkers is a team like, for example, Arsenal. Now, if Arsenal were to finish 8th in the Premier League this season, that would qualify them for the European Conference League. Is that what it's called, the Conference League?
Yeah, the Conference League, yeah.
But under the new Champions League reforms, because of their coefficient, they would be automatically promoted to the Champions League in place of the team that finished 4th in the Premier League this season. So whether it's Leicester or West Ham or Chelsea, because Arsenal have a higher coefficient, they would automatically overtake these teams and go straight into the Champions League. Now tell me that's not a closed door policy to say we want to attract these big teams. It's exactly what the Super League was trying to do. So it's telling teams, well, your league position, it doesn't really matter. Just qualify for Europe and we'll make sure you're all right. That's exactly what they're trying to do.
But for me, the central point is you're never going to get a better chance than now because of what has the last week has shown. You will never get a better chance to engage with fans, to engage with kind of all the various stakeholders, lower clubs, not the big teams, so to speak, to actually bring fairness back to the game. I don't think we will ever see a Champions League where you will just have, the winners of domestic leagues in a tournament again. Okay, that is gone. Pandora's box has been opened. But at what stage does a massive reformation of the game not take place after this? Because if we just go on after what has happened and just tinker around at the edges of the central problems within the game, surely this issue is going to be raised again, is it not?
It will, but then we'll go back into this cycle of where there's outrage and everyone's out in the streets, they're outside their clubs, and it's no to the Super League. It trends all over social media, whatever social media is going to be around the next time this comes about. And then clubs will say, all right, okay, we're sorry. And then they'll get back to reality. They'll go back to playing in the leagues. Then they'll go back behind the scenes and start negotiating on something else, because I know it, you know it, everyone else knows it. That's what's going on right now. There's probably some new league that's been worked on that fans aren't aware of right now because they don't have the involvement with their clubs. They're working on the next thing, and then it'll come out in 2 or 3 years' time, and then everyone will be outraged and the cycle will start again. Is what's happened for the last 20, 30 years. Eventually, what these owners want is for the fan power to diminish and diminish and diminish over time, when it comes to the point of they introduce this and there's no opposition against it. And they thought they had this moment right now, and they were proven wrong. They'll go back to the drawing board, they'll put it back in cycle, and we'll speak about this in another 18 to 24 months' time.
You're painting a very, very bleak picture here. But one thing that springs to my mind with what you've said there is one way to push back against this kind of formation of joint domestic leagues, such as the Beneliga, as you mentioned, Belgium and Netherlands. And again, it's not that these leagues are going to make as much money as the English Premier League, but at least by combining their resources and kind of getting a better product together in terms of a joint domestic league, does it not at least give them a chance? Is that one way to get around? If you, as you say, this cycle cannot be broken, these kind of hotshot owners are just hell-bent on this Super League idea in whatever form it is one solution, kind of joint domestic leagues, power in numbers where these teams can't just be railroaded?
I see that side to it. I know there was also discussions about a Canadian, United States and Mexican league.
Yep.
I think it was meant to fall under the MLS banner, which would have been an interesting one, because those are 3 leagues that are still developing, I would say. The MLS, the Canadian League, and the League MX. Those are leagues where you could combine them to try and enhance the standard of football over there. But we're speaking about Belgium and Holland. We're talking about some of the fantastic sides that have come out of there. Your Anderlechts, your Ajaxes, your PSVs, all these teams that have had European success before. The reason they're coming together isn't to improve the standard of football. It's to improve the revenue that they can generate for the leagues. So at the end of the day, it's always going to come back to money. It's not going to come back to the beautiful game as we know it. It's not for the fans. It's for the owners that are making the money. And the only way that the fans can have a say is to stop financing these clubs if they ever went to go down this road, to pull their money out of the teams. If those 6 teams had broke away into a Super League, as much as we say that the clubs don't need the fans, you would notice that dent in your revenue every year of the 60,000 fans that aren't buying a season ticket, the 60,000 fans that aren't buying a shirt. It might be small change, but it might stop them from signing a player, and then that breaks the cycle. So as much as we love the game of football, it's all about stopping the sort of monopoly aspect of it, where it's all right, we've got this money, we can buy it and move on. So you've got to be very careful when you're looking at restructuring leagues, just to do as you were saying.
There's no easy answers to this. There really aren't.
No.
And if you look at even the United situation is very illustrative. You look at when the Glazers took over, a certain part of that fan base decided to go against the club and not to support it any further. So that is there. I think you're right about that. It's going to be very interesting to kind of see where we go from here. Just one final point before we finish up here. The government in the UK are launching a review of football. It's going to look at financial sustainability, the experience of fans, and also wider governance and ownership of clubs. Is it hot air?
Yes, 100%. 100%. I mean, we're talking about a government that still hasn't been able to put a justice system up that has found justice for 96 football fans that went to a game of football and never came home over 30 years ago. And you're looking for them to reform football. I mean, these people that we pay as politicians to come in, they feign an interest in a club. They feign to know what the game of football is about. I mean, I'm listening to Jonathan Van Tam every week talking about a penalty shootout when it talks about how far along we are with these coronavirus vaccines. Stop trying to relate to the people if you don't have the connection. They want to be involved because at the end of the day, they're getting the tax money from it, and they know that if they put a face on to say, I'm a West Ham fan in an East London borough, they've got a better chance of being elected. So do they have an interest in the game of football? To me, no, but they want to try and stay relevant.
It's very easy to support something that everyone's against. It's very easy to do that. Maybe one of the only benefits from the UK's perspective and Ireland's perspective is because of Boris Johnson's government coming out so strongly against the Super League, maybe it impacts in a good way the World Cup bid. You never know. Unfortunately,
what happens there? What happens there? It boosts the economy. It's all about getting money into the country. I'm being so skeptical. I'm sorry.
Yeah, listen, I think we've painted a bit of a bleak picture, but unfortunately, we are all out of time tonight. So, Colin, thanks a mil for joining. Thanks a mil for everyone tuning in. And one final kind of thought from ourselves tonight. In one of the most seismic weeks in football's history, it leaves a lot of questions, far more questions than answers. But as this week shows, maybe, just maybe, fans aren't as powerless as they think. And they do still have the ability to affect what happens off the pitch as much as on the pitch. Where this goes to next, we don't know. But I'm sure we'll be chatting about it in the coming months. Anyway, thanks again to everyone for tuning in tonight.